Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. The Trump administration has said that China's strategic intentions and trajectory in the Indo-Pacific are destabilizing and counterproductive, reiterating its pledge to maintain the region free and open. A highly placed defense official during a congressional hearing told lawmakers that the US will continue to pursue a constructive, result-oriented relationship with China, but it will not accept policies or actions that threaten to undermine the international rules-based order. Testifying before the same subcommittee, another official said free and open used to describe the Indo-Pacific region were chosen with care because they embody the principles the US sought to embed in the region. Acknowledging India's leadership role in the Indian Ocean, the US discussed potential missile defense cooperation with India as part of its effort to deepen the bilateral strategic partnership. New Delhi is set to play a major role in the Pentagon strategy, which is looking forward to increasing its influence in the Indo-Pacific region. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the strategy for the Indo-Pacific. Joining me on the program today are Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador, Vice Admiral Shekhar, Sinha, retired defense expert, and Professor Swaran Singh, School of International Studies, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Admiral, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's try and put into perspective and try and understand first, why is the Indo-Pacific so important and why is there a battle of supremacy, if I could call it that, in the region?
See, if you look at the map, you'll find that Indo-Pacific is right, Indian Ocean is right in the middle, where it joins the Pacific with the Atlantic through the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Majority of the sea lines of communication pass through this area. All these days, the US had a complete sort of leadership of this area. And now China is slowly encroaching into that territory, basically because China wants to replace the US from #1 position in the world. So US looks at any war or any contest with the world view, and therefore they are right. I would say that they should have woken up much earlier, to be honest, because we have known this for a long time. Our assessment has been such. Our government, our military has been making the preparations because we are not going to fight a world sort of battle. We are going to fight a battle on the borders with China. We are going to possibly have a minor skirmishes in the Indian Ocean. So India's interest lies in the Indian Ocean, not beyond that. The US is rightly worried because economically they are going to get sort of put to #2 position not very far off from now, but militarily the Chinese are trying very hard.
Right. Ambassador, what's at stake for India in the region?
Well, India has been deeply aware since a long time that Chinese strategy in the Indo-Pacific region is impinging on our security needs. China, as you know, has been setting up its String of Pearls project from the Chinese mainland all the way across to Port Sudan on the Gulf of Aden, Gulf of Hormuz. And some of these pearls which are being developed encircle India. Most significantly, the port of Gwadar, which Pakistan has given to China to run, manage and set up, develop. And also, to a great extent, Hambantota port, which the Chinese built for Sri Lanka, but then Sri Lanka was not able to make payments and eventually had to give it to China on a 99-year lease. China is also developing the Chittagong Port and has announced plans to build a port on the Bay of Bengal in Burma, which is not too far from our own Visakhapatnam port. So the Chinese strategy in our part of the world is definitely aimed at encircling India and limiting our own outreach. The Chinese project in the context of One Belt, One Road, particularly the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a very, very important part of the OBOR, is certainly set to make Pakistan more and more dependent on China, because already the indebtedness of Pakistan is in excess of 64 billion, and it is estimated that it will keep growing to the tune of around $90 billion. So Pakistan, which is already hostile to us, will become more and more dependent on China and will become more and more a pawn in the hands of China. So our security needs are definitely impacted. Now, at the same time, many of the countries where the Chinese are building these sort of ports, like for instance Bangladesh, have said that they will not allow Chinese military presence there. But you know, things change. The governments in Bangladesh and again in Maldives and of course in Sri Lanka may be friendly towards us now, but the governments could change and their policies, attitudes could also change, and the Chinese military presence in these ports could also significantly increase. Now, I would also like to say that more and more countries are beginning to realize that the Chinese debt trap is a reality. And it should be noted that Myanmar was originally offered $7 billion for the development of that port on the Bay of Bengal, but it requested that the amount should be scaled down. It is settled only for $1.7 billion because it is aware of the debt trap. But not many countries are, and more countries are finding themselves entrapped by the Chinese in this way, and the Chinese are able to exert their sway and decide what policy should be followed. They are able to make these countries follow the Chinese line, and that's a matter of worry for us.
Professor, who are the other players really as far as this particular region is concerned, and what's at stake for them also really? Because several of them have tried to, fight it out with the Chinese. The Philippines has taken China to The Hague as well. The court passed a ruling. We all know what has happened after that. So it's a precarious and a tricky situation for some of these smaller countries in the region as well.
I think what Indo-Pacific debate underlines is this whole enormous transformation in geopolitics. And since in 20th century, much of the world was led by military alliances, military bases that made United States the important player. Now, all the friends and allies of United States, other than United States, is going to be impacted, as was just said by Ambassador Prabhu Dayal. Rise of China is really changing equations, not only between United States and China, which is why United States has come out with this report underlining what is happening in Indo-Pacific, which is where it is trying to reinforce its own control. So the friends and allies of United States have to be now really kind of taking care of maintaining fine balance, because most of them still continue to have a very strong security relationship with the United States, but all of them have a very strong relationship with China, economic relationship with China. And I think they have to really find out how to balance that relationship between these two major players. And that is where the difficulty for these smaller nations is. But the truth is that the old system of Pacific Command and Central Command and Africa Command is no longer the dominant narrative. Dominant narrative is about $2.5 trillion of trade that China has from east of Africa till the shores of United States. And that is what is making these two oceans look like one. And that is the new geopolitics. And China is not only having a major trade, but investing billions of dollars under Belt and Road Initiative. So that's the truth, and United States is somewhere losing that supremacy and exclusive control. And I think that is an anxiety which is shared by all its friends and allies, including India. So India would be seen as an important player as well, and India is trying to do the fine balance. For example, on Indo-Pacific debate, starting from the June speech at Shangri-La of Prime Minister, India is constantly underlining need to bring in China into the Indo-Pacific debate. In fact, in our annual bilateral maritime dialogue, we have brought this on the agenda. India also is extremely reluctant to put any military connotations to the Quad, for example. So India is one country which is directly seeing itself impacted and is trying to sort of maintain equilibrium through equidistance kind of a thing. So the report that has come out from Pentagon this week is nothing new. I mean, most of other nations in region have been saying similar things. The fact that United States says the similar thing brings a certain weight to the same argument. But fundamentally, China is a challenge which is up there, and we have to really find out how to deal with that. And I think all these nations are trying in various ways.
We should be more interested, clearly, Admiral, as to what's happening with us and in our immediate neighborhood. The ambassador spoke about string of pearls. Do we have an answer, really, as far as the string of pearls are concerned? Several people talk about Iron Curtain and so on and so forth. Is that workable, doable? How far through is it, really?
No, he's quite right. The string of pearls, Sri Lanka, the ports in Myanmar and, Bangladesh, Mali nearly became a sort of captive of the debt, ongoing debt trap. So hopefully it will get stopped now. And then you have a base in Djibouti and you have now in Gwadar. We need to do little more. As far as just the military power is concerned, we still have a lot of edge on many issues, because now what happens at sea is that if you keep a surveillance on the choke points from where this traffic actually flows into the Indian Ocean, then you get the warning of the incoming traffic much in advance. 750 nautical miles to be precise, 1500 kilometers on either side.
Even the sophisticated submarines?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So what you do is that you keep a track, and thereafter you get enough time, because they don't come very quickly. You get enough time to prepare yourself as to find out what is he up to. You see, China's problem is not that why is he here, because freedom of navigation is also applicable to China.
Yeah.
But he does it very, very opaquely. He doesn't tell you what is he doing. He will suddenly surface close to your shore. So that is a worry which we can handle, or we are handling. But the issue is that China-Pakistan collusion is the worrisome point, because Pakistan is here 24 hours, his home is here. China's home is not here, but Pakistan's home is here, and they have made him a sort of proxy. Pakistan is a proxy for China, so whenever there is a trouble to be created militarily, it will tell the Pakistanis to do it.
Talking about military trouble, Admiral, the Pentagon report says after Djibouti, China is scouting for a few more military bases really on foreign shores. Cambodia and a few other countries are mentioned as far as this Pentagon report is concerned. Is that a worrying sign?
Of course it is a worrying sign. As I said, America looks at the world as its own sort of military leadership area. And anywhere, any infringement, the Americans will get worried. But as you said, we are more worried about the Indian Ocean. We are more worried about what Pakistan does in collusion with China. With China, as Professor Swaran Singh said, that India has been very careful. Prime Minister in his speech, he says inclusive Indo-Pacific. So it has given a lot of hope to the Chinese. Hopefully that, India will, follow this up very much. I was in Beijing immediately after that, and they said so, that we are very happy with your Prime Minister's speech. So I said, but you also have to walk the talk. Because what you're doing in Sri Lanka, what you're doing in Maldives, Maldives election was not over then, and what you're doing in Gwadar, that worries us. So obviously there has to be a meeting ground where we, on one issue, we cooperate with China, on other issue, while we are cautious, we will be competing. Very much a competition, and another one, we want to avoid a contest.
Right.
But as far as the maritime power is concerned, I can see that next 8-9 years is a clear window before China really becomes a military threat all by itself.
Right.
So that is my overall sort of thought.
So we have to watch out for that, is
what
you're suggesting. Right. Ambassador, what do you make of the Pentagon report, really? Is the situation as dire as it makes it out to be?
No, I think the Pentagon report, in a very crystal clear fashion, enunciates the fact that China's outreach, the global outreach, is growing at the expense of many other countries, including the United States and, of course, India. Now, you rightly talked about Cambodia. Along with Cambodia, the Chinese have also sought bases in Vanuatu. And I understand that both these countries, Cambodia and Vanuatu, have declined it. But at the same time, Cambodia, for instance, has accepted military assistance from China. And the Chinese have a policy of slowly implementing their designs. It's called the creep and acquire policy. They did it with great stealth in very masterly fashion in the South China Sea, where those islands, the Spratly Islands, were really under the control of Philippines and Indonesia and Brunei. And the Chinese really had no presence there, but then they acquired some reefs. They made their presence felt on some reefs. And slowly, before people could realize, they added 3,200 hectares of land by reclamation to these reefs, and now they have full-fledged bases there. So the Chinese strategy is to play with time and go very slowly and catch people unawares. So I worry that in our neighborhood, they are trying to do quite the same thing. Now, what should be India's approach? We should be very careful to distinguish between what we should not do and what we should do. For one thing, we should not be drawn into any military alliances against the Chinese, because the Chinese are very sensitive about this matter. Now, the Americans have floated this idea of the OBOR.
The Chinese.
The Quad.
The Quad, yeah.
And they have roped in India along with Japan and Australia as the 4 members for this. India has been opposing the idea of converting this into a military sort of configuration, because the Chinese are going to be upset. So we already have a difficult relationship with the Chinese, and we should not get embroiled in a worsening relationship.
Yeah, we shouldn't complicate matters.
We should not complicate matters. What we should do is to befriend our neighbors and other countries in the larger region, so that they are equally wary of what the Chinese presence entails. For instance, I spoke of the Spratly Islands. Now, Indonesia, Philippines are greatly upset about the Chinese presence there and the Chinese setting up a base there. So we should engage in dialogue with these countries to sensitize them about what Chinese activities in that region are doing, which would be harmful for them.
Right.
So rather than trying to form a military alliance, we should, through very good and adroit diplomacy, sensitize all these countries. Of course, it is very important to have India-friendly governments in our own neighborhood. Fortunately, at the moment we have in Bangladesh and in Mali, also in Sri Lanka. I think it is very important for us to strengthen the hands of these governments so that they are able to play constructive roles within their countries and their popularity increases, because they will be able to do what we want done, that is to say, minimize Chinese influence in their respective countries.
Right.
But taking the Chinese head on, which is what the Americans would want us to do, to get drawn into the American axis, into the American alliance systems, that would not be wise for us to do.
Absolutely. You know, Professor, what options then do some of these smaller countries really have at the end of the day? Because they know there is a China right in their backyard, you know, in their foyer, or whatever you want to call it at the end of the day. So what options do some of these smaller countries have?
Frank, there's an old English saying, money makes the mayor go. Chinese have about 4 to 5 times size of economy compared to India. They have about 12 times foreign exchange reserve compared to India. They have about 4 to 5 times annual bilateral trade compared to India. OBOR expects to put in $1 trillion into various countries. So we have to be first of all pragmatic, and I think a lot of reflection is already happening that this is an asymmetric relationship. So we are no longer seeking parity with China. But that doesn't mean weak, strong relationship. We have to only change tools and tenor. We have different calibration of how we want to deal with Chinese. So we are emphasizing on how our relations with several of these countries, especially our neighbors, is distinctly, apart from how Chinese are addressing relationship, only commercial relationship. And I think that is being emphasized in our neighborhood very clearly, and that need to be emphasized, and I think that is showing impact in that sense. But it's also not to say that India is simply playing ball with Beijing. We are doing several things that they are also very upset about. For example, look at India's recent engagements in Sabang in Indonesia. You have Changi in Singapore. We are also investing in places in Sri Lanka. We are in Assumption Island in Seychelles. We are in Mauritius. We are in Madagascar. We are in Chabahar. Chinese can give you a whole string of pearls which they think they are concerned about. So India is calibrating very carefully and choosing both military options but also diplomatic options. And Chinese, the fact that they have much bigger levers compared to us, they have much bigger leverages, and they have one-party system, so they can do things at bigger scale and higher speed. And that is already being understood in recalibration of asymmetric relationship that India has. And that is where our equations with other major powers, the European major powers or the United States, becomes very important for us. And I think we have really been building that relationship as well with United States, despite, if you see, Donald Trump's equations with most world leaders are complicated. And you can see India's Prime Minister as an exception there. So we have carefully managed that relationship so far.
There was a call at the beginning of the year as well, where both leaders decided to take forward the bilateral relationship to new heights as well.
Exactly.
Despite what happened with the Afghanistan
But
library issue.
that's a careful walk that India will have to continue doing, of not displeasing too far both Beijing and Washington DC, and sort of taking care of not annoying them beyond a point. And I think otherwise, basically, it is our national interest that guides our policy. And we are carefully making sure we are not seen as aligning with any one of the two sides.
Right.
But the space for neutrality also is decreasing, remember. The turf is really the whole trade war and other things are making that neutrality space really limited for India to maneuver. But I think we have to then also emphasize on building our own strong relationship with several of these countries. And some of these efforts are already happening on the ground.
Right.
So basically, the report that we are discussing, I think, reinforces the arguments that several Indian people have already been making, and several other countries in Asia have been making also as well.
You know, talking about closing comments now from all my guests. Admiral, talking about the United States now, what do you make of the US's potential missile defense cooperation with India?
You see, it may not happen immediately. It's a slightly long-term plan because the S-400 is just about being inducted. It depends on how many cities that we want to protect. You know, when you have the vital points and vital assets, then you would wish to protect it, which can be targeted by the adversaries. So I think that, you know, it's a good thing that the talk has started, though it may not happen very immediately. But more than that, you know, the trouble with this relationship is that China has overtaken many of these countries in the cyber warfare, and they're doing the cyber reconnaissance at all times, and they feel that they can win a war, an actual battle, or they can collapse the economic systems by interfering in all the systems which are economic systems, financial systems. And that is a matter of big worry to the Americans. And therefore, they have already raised the cyber command. They have increased the strength to about 6,400. Recently, the Defense Intelligence Agency, they came out with a report, and they have cautioned the armed forces that please do not have everything on your net, or if it is there, then let it be a standalone. Though even standalone systems can be infected. So the worry of having a S-400 or equivalent system in a major network is another problem. So there has to be some method by which we can have the, like Professor Singh said, you know, that asymmetric relationship. We don't have to match everything that the Chinese do, but we have to worry about the China-Pakistan axis.
Right.
And we have to prepare for those vulnerabilities where China is vulnerable, and have your force levels in all aspects, including the domain of space and cyber and electronic warfare, so that you can handle that.
Right. Very quickly, Ambassador, can we expect other like-minded nations really to join the bandwagon, maybe join India and the United States and look towards a more free and open Indo-Pacific?
Well, very frankly, throughout the Cold War, India was able to spearhead the non-aligned movement and kept a lot of countries out of the ambit of the two superpowers. I think we can play a similar role at this time. The Chinese have two very defined, well thought out strategies, the One Belt, One Road initiative and the Digital Silk Road initiative, through which they try and increase their economic footprint, particularly in strategically important areas. We should try and sensitize all these countries to the dangers of coming under the Chinese economic footprint. The example of the Maldives is clear. They became so indebted that the per capita debt was in excess of $8,000. Similarly, Sri Lanka became so indebted that it had to give away the Hambantota port on a 99-year lease to the Chinese. Pakistan is finding itself in a similar debt trap. So what Indian diplomacy can try and achieve is to forewarn through the process of dialogue countries which are tending to fall under Chinese influence of the dangers which they would invite by doing so, and keeping them away from this very unseemly war, this unseemly war of influence which is taking place between the United States on one hand and the Chinese, because the Chinese are trying to displace the United States as the #1 power in the Indo-Pacific region. The United States is resenting it, trying to rope in more and more countries to be part of their grand design.
Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks on what's the best way forward for India.
I think first it is important to underline that Chinese are no longer, very near to crossing United States. What we are talking of is maybe in, general GDP terms, that they may at some stage be a larger economy than the United States, but United States had several other levers. The simple fact that they are spending 3+ times on defense compared to China. Will China become international leader and take on that kind of responsibility? So I think in one way they could be in becoming a largest economy, but United States will continue to be a very important player for a long time to come. And India understands that, I think, very clearly, how to deal with both these countries very, very carefully. And I think it's important to underline that things like last year you had all 10 ASEAN leaders coming to our Republic Day celebrations. That is a result of India's diplomacy very clearly, how we are engaging these nations. And that also has a lot of weight to India when India speaks at global level. And finally, I think there's always an advantage of being not the second in command in that sense, because China is under tremendous scrutiny. Everything China does is being scrutinized by everybody else in the world for obvious reasons. India as yet doesn't have that disadvantage. So therefore you see India, when India procures S-400, United States can definitely not behave the way they behave with the Chinese when Chinese purchase S-400. So we have definite advantages over China. We are largest democracy. We have enormous other advantages of having played a great role in various events last 70 years at global level.
Right.
In that sense, our acceptability at global level is very different compared to Chinese, and that's our strength.
Right.
And I think we must make use of that strength.
Yeah, we should focus on our strengths really going forward, and that's what is going to work to our advantage, is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of India's World. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback and your suggestions with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.